Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Jets Pulse. This is Thomas Christopher, aka Tommy Jets, coming at you live. And hey man, a lot of stuff has happened so far this week. We got the first instances of padded practice going for the New York Jets, and we have to talk about Joe Tippmann's struggles at the center position. I know. Some people are like, hey man, we're only in the first week of padded practice. Why are we focusing on Joe Tippmann's struggles right now? Well, here's the thing. Tippmann had these same struggles last season after he was moved from guard to center. And so far in the short period of time, Tippmann is once again struggling. And on the second day of practice, I was fortunate enough to be there. Shout out to Connor Long. Shout out to Brandon Pockris, as well as his father, Jeff Pockris, for helping out with that situation. Great time, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But as for Tippmann, man, listen, before practice started, Aaron Rodgers and Joe Tippmann were talking, discussing what was likely, some situations involving the same, errors that he was facing. In the early portion of practice, Tippmann and the other offensive centers were also working on these snapping situations. However, once practice started, guess what happened? The same kind of issues, high snaps, errant snaps, and it wasn't just from Joe Tippmann, it was from the entire offensive line, which is kind of crazy to see because, communication seems to be an issue right now for the Jets. Not only with that, but, we had issues of players getting in and out of the huddle. We had specifically Jeremy Ruckert, who was in motion pre-snap, and he shouldn't have been. He was subsequently replaced on the on the snap right after. Pardon me, I cannot talk right now. He was replaced on the the snap right after for making that mistake. There's mistakes that the Jets, thankfully, I will premise it with this. Thankfully, we are only in the first week of padded practice. Okay, offense is always going to be behind defense, but we can't just ignore Joe Tippmann's struggles right now. He's year two. He's 6'6" for center, which is a big freaking center, man. I don't think people understand that at that position, it's a really big guy, and it's okay. If he can't play center, that's okay too. Like, there's no reason why I can't. When speaking to the aforementioned colleague of mine, Brandon Pockris, me and him were discussing that, hey, it's okay if Joe Tippmann can't play center because we can move him right to guard where he's proven he's a really good guard. And if the Jets need to, they can move John Simpson to the bench, which is fine. And then you have a combination of AVT and Tippmann at the guard positions. You look to bring in somebody like Connor McGovern or even the injured Connor Williams, who's coming back from an ACL injury, the former Miami Dolphin. There's options out there, but at the worst, we need competition in that room because it's not just Tippmann that is struggling with these snaps either. On Tuesday's practice, the second team center as well as the third team center was seeing these struggles. And we even saw Brady Latham come in for some snaps under center too, which shout out to Brady Latham. He did a great job taking on a stunt during practice, which was probably my favorite offensive blocking rep throughout the day. So I just wanted to give him a little shout out there. But as we were discussing, Tippmann, he has to get these struggles on the reps. There's this week of practice, and then we get started into next week, and that next week is where things start to get real. And if this is continuing to happen into next week, that's when fans really need to be concerned. It's really easy for people who aren't paying attention to be like, yeah, it's the first week, blah, blah, blah. But guess what they've been doing this whole offseason program? They've been playing together. Timmons had to snap the ball. Like, these are issues that shouldn't be prevalent right now as we head into the second, our first week of padded practice, second week of training camp. It's something that excuses cannot be made. He's in a situation now where he's the starting center. Okay. And if he's having these type of errant snaps in game, then Rodgers who knows what happens. Rodgers is going to get killed out there. We already have him gimp. He still doesn't seem like a guy who's completely trusting of his leg, of where he had his Achilles injury. He still is a little gimpy in those situations. Okay. People may not want to admit that, but it's kind of evident when you see him having to scramble out, having to move around. He doesn't really want to do that yet, as much as, why would he? He's not even a year recovered from an Achilles injury, which takes most people a good amount of time. Now, for the quarterback position, thankfully, it wasn't on his plant leg, so he can still do a lot of the things quarterbacks need to do. But for the Jets' sake, they can't have this guy moving around crazy, and they can't have their offensive linemen stepping on the guy's feet, in pass block reps, which has happened 2 days in a row now. And as we head into Wednesday, let's really hope that it doesn't happen again. But I want to dive into a little bit more on Tuesday's practice. The first team offense did not look great. I'll just say that the blocking was okay. There's actually a situation where Will McDonald, kind of stepped up in the absence of Hassan Reddick. He beat Tyron Smith clean off the snap. Would have had a would-bend sack on Rodgers. So that's something we really needed to see from McDonald with Reddick's absence. And I'm sure if McDonald continues to, improve as these practices go on, I wouldn't be shocked if we see Reddick, start being like, hey, maybe I need to make a deal here. Otherwise, it's not going to bode well for him. The guy he's set to hold off could end up replacing him. I don't know if that'll be the case, but we're seeing some good strides now from Will McDonald, which we needed to see because, quite frankly, his rookie season wasn't great. As for the rest of the offense, though, for the first team, it wasn't that great, man. It really wasn't that great. As I spoke to before, there's miscommunications. What I didn't talk about was a miscommunication between Rodgers and Garrett Wilson. Now, I know there's some videos going on the sideline about those guys arguing. They weren't arguing. I'll just say that I was there. I witnessed it. Heated discussion at the beginning, but at the end of the discussion, these guys were laughing, having fun, just talking ball. So it's just something that was completely hyped up by people who don't follow the team and weren't at the practice, which you can expect because all these people want our clicks. They don't want to be trustworthy news sources, even though they should be. Journalistic integrity has really died in the past 10 years or so. Let's just keep that 100%. But there was a miscommunication, a deep post by Garrett Wilson. I don't know if he didn't run deep enough. I don't know if Rodgers was expecting a 9. But there was a heavily overthrown ball by Rodgers and Wilson. It was uncatchable. But to be honest, Rodgers didn't have a great day of practice on Tuesday, which is not something we need to be completely worried about. But it was, upsetting to see. Nobody wants to see their 4-time NFL MVP quarterback have a bad practice. He was throwing behind guys. He almost threw a hospital ball to Garrett Wilson, too, prior to that. Would have taken him out. He also threw a ball in the chest of DJ Reed, which was also behind Wilson. And then, of course, we got that spectacular Malachi Corley highlight of his one-handed catch. But that was also a high ball by Rodgers. But with that said, he still had a number of good plays and passes. There was a pass out to the flat that he had to Tyler Conklin that was just out of the reach of Quincy Williams, and that ended up being for a nice solid gain. So there's definitely things to like. And a lot of the offensive line, other than Tippmann, did play well. When you're not noticing the offensive line, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That means you're not seeing that they're making mistakes. And I think that's kind of why Tippmann is being hyper-focused right now. Not only because we're seeing him make the mistakes, but he's also playing the starting center spot. And the Jets really need good play out of their offensive line this year. We saw how terrible it was last year. Forget about how bad Zach Wilson and company were last year at quarterback. But the offensive line did zero favors, not even just for the quarterbacks, but for Breece Hall and the running backs. So we really need to see that focus going on, okay? I also want to break down Malachi Corley because that kid was everywhere, all right? We saw in previous practices that he was lined up in the backfield, which is awesome. I thought it was going to be a gimmick at first, but when you see him doing pass reps out of the backfield, you know that they're going on sub packages there to get him involved in some type of way with the ball in his hands in order to get yak opportunities, which is awesome. We need to see that from a guy who's been labeled the Yak King, and he has to prove that he is the Yak King. But other than that, we saw him move with the first team and the second team on offense. We also saw him play on the punt return and kick return teams. On top of the kick return teams too, we also saw Braylon Allen, Terry Cohen, Isaiah Davis. Basically everybody who's not named Breece Hall, but Izzy Abanikanda. He might not be here anymore because he was on the kick coverage team as the rest of his counterparts in that running back room were on the return team. That does not bode well for Izzy. Running back being on the coverage team isn't necessarily rare, but it is rare to see, the third-year running back that they had so much high hopes for playing solely with the third-team offense. Not only that, he was getting outperformed by Xavier Valade, sorry. pronunciation. And that is where it gets a little more concerning. Izzy might be the odd man out, and that's, maybe the Jets will try to sneak him on the practice squad. But to be honest with you, I don't think the Jets are going to be hurting too much if Izzy is not on the team. They have Braylon Allen has looked great in practice so far. Let's just be real. And Davis hasn't looked bad either. They've both been running well. Cohen seems to be a good guy out of the backfield for pass catching situations as a scat back, and he has the opportunity to be a returner for the team. So he has his positions laid out. The only one who doesn't have his positions laid out right now is that guy, is Izzy, man. And he has to kind of work on that, or it's going to be an interesting situation. Now, moving to the defense, there is a lot to like. Okay, this defensive front seven is looking good. I might not have mentioned Tippmann getting beat badly by Quinnen Williams, but he got beat badly by Quinnen Williams and what would have been a would-be sack on Aaron Rodgers. Not only that, the rest of the front seven has looked good. I mentioned how Will McDonald beat Tyron Smith. Jermaine Johnson wasn't seen as much on that day, but Eric Watts, the undrafted free agent out of Connecticut, UConn, he stepped up. He's had a great session of practices lately. Senior Bowl standout as well. I got to watch him there, and he performed very well there. And he's just making his name for himself, man. He was working with Quinnen Williams on sled reps in practice during individual practice reps prior to team portion. He was looking good there, too. He was getting coached up by the Jets defensive line coaches, and he has seemed to put that to work. He's a quick learner. I really love seeing UDFA guys stick with the team, and not only stick with the team, but have a role with the team. It kind of stinks that we see Bryce Huff leave, because it would have been cool to have multiple homegrown guys in that situation. But, that's the business aspect that we all kind of loathe. As for linebackers, man, Jamien Sherwood's looking fast. I know I've criticized his pass coverage skills. There's still issues there. But, he's still pursuing the ball carriers quickly and making plays in the run game, which that's his bread and butter. That's what he should be great at. I really need to see him perform in pass coverage as a defender and be able to stop these, and especially in zone. He seems to be a little too lax in zone sometimes, allowing plays to come in front of him when it shouldn't be. He seems not to make plays on the ball itself, but the people carrying the ball, if that makes sense. As for Quincy Williams, Quincy looked great. CJ Mosley looked good. The back seven looked great. DJ Reed, who's been struggling a little bit, he was primarily on Garrett Wilson on Tuesday's practice, and he was shutting Wilson down for a decent amount of reps. As I mentioned before, he had a pass that was thrown right in his chest by Rodgers, a little behind. Garrett seems to always have a step on somebody, so it's not it's not worrisome that Reed is like a half step behind. The coverage was good. He played good coverage, and the Jets defense was moving their cornerbacks kind of throughout the rotation yesterday, which is really interesting to see. Especially with Sauce's comments earlier this offseason about wanting to play more than just one side of the field, and I think we're kind of starting to see that. But Sauce looked good too. He did get beat deep on a 9 by Allen Lazard, which I don't think most people expected. It was still good coverage, but Lazard definitely had a step on him. And the other starter cornerback I need to talk about is Michael Carter the second. Now, this isn't practice related, okay? I just need to know what the heck the Jets are doing not signing this guy to an extension. They haven't even talked to his, per Cimini, they still haven't even talked to his reps, and this is from June. So, it's a month since then. I really hope that they've made some leeway trying to talk to this guy, because he's the number one slot cornerback, nickelback in the league. Like, what are we doing? He's great in coverage. He's great against the run. He's a great team leader. What are we doing here? Are we going to let another homegrown guy walk away just because Joe Douglas wants to be cheap with his pockets and not believe in the people he's picking? Is that what we're doing? Because we've seen it with Bryce Huff. We've seen it a couple times now. And if this is the route that Douglas wants to go, where he just thinks he can keep cycling through homegrown talent, his hit rate isn't that great, guys. It's not that great. Remember Zach Wilson? Come on, what are we doing? Remember Denzel Mims? What are we doing here? There's certain stuff that we have to pay attention to, and making sure you're hitting on guys is not how you want to live, especially when you have homegrown talent available, young. Carter the second's only 25 years old, man. He's not old. Like, I don't know what the weight of what this is. The longer the Jets wait, the more expensive he's going to be, especially if this goes down through the season and he continues to play at a high level. The Jets are going to price themselves out of a guy that they selected, out of a guy that wants to play with the Jets. I just don't understand it. That's starting to become my biggest pet peeve with Joe Douglas right now, is not wanting to pay the guys he picked. He picked these guys, and he's not going to pay them out. You can't just get, and you know what? Not even just that. We're already seeing what's happening with the Hassan Reddick cycle. Okay, you let Bryce Huff walk because you don't want to pay him. You trade for Hassan Reddick, who is an elite edge rusher. I'm not going to take that away. I'm not going to say he's not elite, but you bring in Hassan Reddick, who has nothing with the team. He doesn't have any loyalty, anything. You bring him in, and there's a handshake deal that, he's going to re-sign this contract as soon as he gets on the team. He's going to take the guaranteed money for this year as they work on a contract for next year. And what has happened? The guy has sat out every day of camp, OTAs, mini camp. He hasn't been around. And, the Jets are saying they won't budge there, but now they're starting to budge, but you're not going to do that for guys that you selected. It seems absurd to me. It's a really big, as you can see how I'm a little animated right now. It's something that really bugs me during this Joe Douglas tenure, is kind of letting guys like that who are talented kind of walk away and keeping the pieces like Zach Wilson for a year longer than they should be. You know what I mean? There's no reason Zach Wilson should have even been on the team last year. Let's just get that out of the way. That was a sunk cost fallacy that Joe Douglas refused to let go. You know what and it's unfortunate. So I apologize on the rant. That just got me amped up because I really love Michael Carter, and he's a great player. But for the rest of the secondary, I want to talk about Stiggers. Stiggers looked great yesterday in Tuesday's practice. He had a nice pass block pass deflection on a short pass during the portion. I believe it was with the twos. Also JBC, Jarek Bernard Convert, he looked good. He got beat a couple times by Harrell. So there's ups and downs for him. Tyler Harrell did beat him on a 9 a couple times. Malik Taylor looked also good too and beat him a couple times. But JBC put the clamps on some people too. Let's not take that away from him. He looked good. It was inconsistent, but there was still a lot to like there. And not only that, JBC ended the team practice with an interception on Tyrod Taylor, which is huge. The guy's making plays, man. You got to love that. You know what I mean? And a couple other shout outs I want to give to is to Solomon Thomas and Javon Kinlaw. I've been a little bit critical of Kinlaw because of the contract they gave him as opposed to cheaper players who have proven themselves more. But as we saw with, Solomon Thomas, who I just mentioned, he had his best year under Robert Saleh after not playing up to the level his draft capital suggested during his stint with the San Francisco 49ers. Now we're seeing that kind of play out again with Javon Kinlaw. Kinlaw did not play great with the 49ers. He had his best season last year, and I believe off the top of my head, it was only 3.5 sacks that he received. It was not a lot of sacks. His best year wasn't the best that you would want from a former first-round pick. But with that said now, he has the opportunity to be one of the starters on the defensive line, work alongside Quinnen Williams and this front seven that is monstrous. And if he can do that, and if he can step up the same way that Solomon Thomas stepped up, Jet fans have to be excited, man. That front seven's looking really good, deadly. They're going to create havoc. And when and if Reddick gets back to the team and starts practicing as well, and he can kind of put his nose down and just attack, it's going to be a stout front. And the Jets defense is going to be great again, which is, why I wanted to preface at the beginning of this episode. These offensive struggles don't necessarily have to be worrisome other than the Tippmann stuff. I don't care what any fan says. You need to be worried about Tippmann still not being able to snap. But with that said, the defense is great. And in these first padded practices, the offense is not going to be as great. The last guy I kind of really want to shout out and talk about now is, Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard is a polarizing player. Sorry, for Jets fans, okay? We all know that he was signed only because of his relationship with Rodgers. We don't need to pretend that. It's another reason why some of these situations with Joe Douglas, I have some concerns at the way he moves about certain things. But with that said, I'm in on Alan Lazard this year. Okay. Mike Williams, we've discussed in the last show, might not be healthy. If he is healthy, might not be the same guy. Malachi Corley plays a slot. He's going to be a versatile chess piece on the Jets offense. Other than Garrett Wilson, though, the only other guy who can kind of play in that outside role and kind of be a bigger bodied player is Alan Lazard. And Alan Lazard has that chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. Whether Jets fans or Jets ownership or Jets coaches want to believe in Alan Lazard, you're going to have to, because it's going to be a thing. This isn't last year when, Rodgers got hurt and he checked out because Zach Wilson and the litany of the island of misfit toys were, back at quarterback for the Jets. As long as Rodgers is healthy, he's going to focus on Lazard. And we saw that on yesterday's practice. Funny tidbit is the very first practice rep was a pass targeted to Alan Lazard, who dropped it, and the crowd booed him, which I think is ridiculous, to be honest with you. No matter what you feel about Lazard, you don't need to boo the guy. Like, let's be fans of you can be a fan of the team without being an asshole. And pardon my cursing. I try not to cuss on these, but I'm just going to say what it is. It's not his fault Joe Douglas paid the bank for him. It's not his fault. And, if he checked out last year, I would have checked out too, man. You had fucking Zach Wilson playing at quarterback, costing you games. And let's be frank, before Alan Lazard checked out last year, he was making big plays for the Jets offense. I've been watching the film. You can watch on our Monday montages where we do feature Garrett Wilson's route running. Shout out Garrett Wilson. You can see the other plays made by Alan Lazard throughout these games. The guy has not been slacking, at least up in the beginning part of the season, where it was still, the Jets still somewhat had a chance before you knew that Zach Wilson was going to ruin things. Okay. Now, heading into this year, he's going to be a thing. The fans don't need to boo him. And I love that Lazard came back on the very next rep, made a contested catch over DJ Reed, and he made plays throughout the game. He made another contested catch too. I think he got hit by Chuck Clark, held on to the ball, got hurt a little bit, when knocked out of him. But he seemed to be fine after that. Now, listen, man, you may not like Lazard, but he's going to be a thing. And we have to hope as fans that he shows out, because what are we going to do? Root for a guy to lose and play poorly? No, I'm not going to do that. If he's playing poorly, I will call him out. But until then, we don't need to do that. And I'm just hoping that the rest of this week's practice and next week's practice goes well. This the things we have to. So let's recap the things we have to pay attention to leading into this upcoming week. It's really Joe Tippmann and his continuing struggles, not necessarily as a blocker, but snapping the ball. The snapping the ball needs to be huge. Communication between the offense. And I'm not just talking about, routes and stuff. I'm talking about blocking assignments. I'm talking about motion pre-snap. I'm talking about in the huddle. Guys weren't knowing who was in the huddle, who was coming out of the huddle, and stupid penalties that were happening. They had a delay game or a false start. They weren't necessarily clear on that during one of the 11-on-11 sessions. All right. The other thing we need to keep a focus on is this front seven. Make sure it's still performing at a high level against the first team. We got to do that. And you know what? That's secondary. We got to see somebody step up. If they're not going to pay Michael Carter, we have to keep an eye on Stiggers and JBC and potentially another player who might be able to show out. Also, I want to give a shout out to Tyrod Taylor and Malik Taylor. The Taylor to Taylor connection was huge. Let's just say it was tailor made. It was looking great on Tuesday. Let's just hope that kind of pans out well. Maybe it helps Malik Taylor solidify himself with a roster spot. Brownlee might be the odd guy out in the wide receiver room. So that'll be interesting developments to keep an eye on. Let's continue to hope that Tyrod Taylor looks good in practice, because on Tuesday he looked like the best quarterback in practice. So we want to see that too. Not that he's outperforming Rodgers, but that he's playing at a high level, because nobody wants another freaking Zach Wilson situation if Rodgers ends up going down, getting hurt, not looking the same. we need to make sure that Tyrod looks great and is able to be a solidified number 2 for us. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Jets Pulse, bringing you your daily, weekly New York Jets news, highlights, stories. You can catch us again next Wednesday, of course. And stay tuned for this Friday's upcoming episode with the aforementioned colleague of mine, Brandon Pockris. We're going to talk about Jets training camp, practices, season, a whole lot of fun stuff. So stay up, Jets fans. Jets, Jets, baby. Let's go.